You're listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
HEKER Robertson is a former civil servant. He's been in the bowels of the bureaucracy, but left all that behind to become a pastor at Destiny Church. I met him at Avi Yemeni's book launch in Wellington and was intrigued by his story. So with me today from Wellington is HEKER Robertson, and we're going to explore what drives him to make a real difference. Welcome to The Crunch. We had a good old chat in your office on Saturday night ahead of the Avi Yemeni book launch in Wellington, and I've got to say thanks for stepping up in that case and providing us a venue that couldn't be boycotted after the rowdies of the Antifa crowd managed to get the Wellington Cathedral to capitulate. So I really appreciate you stepping up for that. But it was during that chat, HEKER, that you touched on a couple of things that I really wanted to talk to you about. And so we're going to talk about those today and in a wide-ranging conversation.
Sounds good.
So people don't know where Destiny Church is in Petone. It's in a hard hat area, isn't it?
We're in an area that they call the Bronx, so people who know Petone know this area well. It's in probably the most popular street in Petone, but at the wrong end of that street. So,
yeah, Jackson Street, Petone. And what's across the road from your church?
So I guess it's well known for having the Mongrel Mob directly across the road from us. Historically, I think just years it's been the meeting place, the gathering place of the mob here in Petone, here in the hut. And it's just been traditionally generations of that has been going on, and still to this day.
And you guys are running your Man Up program from your church there locally. How is that been engaging with gang members, particularly the Mongrel Mob across the road?
It's been great. I think we moved to these premises probably about a year ago, and the activity was quite heightened across the road. It always is. It's always full of extra members, and they know exactly who we are. We have a lot of men in our midst who are all ex-Mongrel Mob, and we even have men coming along who are active, current Mongrel Mob members. But we're across the road from each other, but the engagement's pretty good because they know who we are. They know that we work with their families, and there's a real connection there. And I'm not just talking about the mob. I'm talking about Black Power, Nomads, a number of different gang members are all walking together, and they see that unity. So we don't have any trouble with them across the road. We all come from the same families. We come from the same cultures. We've had the same lifestyles, backgrounds, hardships, dysfunctions. So, the only difference is that's where they're currently at in life. But it's good to be across the road from them to show that there's support here for anyone who needs it.
So have you found that being across the road has given these, particularly the Mongrel Mob members, a pathway for them to seek alternatives to a criminal lifestyle just simply by starting that process by crossing the road?
Yeah, absolutely. Your presence needs to be there. People need to see an example of what they could have, where they could go. So that they decide to take that path, but you need to have it modeled to you. And when you see on one side of the road a bunch of men who used to be active gang members who've done a lot of time in prison for being violent offenders, had their kids taken away from them by the system, and are now fathers who are thriving, who've had all their kids returned to them, are now productive members of society. It's quite a stark contrast when you see every Sunday, and not just on Sundays, but throughout the week. And I think it's brought something new to this neighbourhood as well. There are neighbours who probably were very conscious of their surroundings And now what they see is a whole new bunch of people who've moved into their neighborhood, but who are actively taking ownership of the streets. There's no fear, there's no intimidation, and there's only life and prosperity and hope. And so we go, whether it's here across the street, our people are all around the city, right around the country, and just providing an example of something real as opposed to something that I would say is counterfeit, because it's not,
I was born in Fiji, and and I go back to Fiji, and I usually just go to Suva because that's where I was born. I'm not a tourist going back to Fiji. I'm a local going back to Fiji, and I imagine it's the same for you. I mean, although you're born in New Zealand, you go back to Samoa. The thing that I find incredible in Fiji, and I imagine it's the same in Samoa, is on a Sunday, you walk around the streets and there's lots and lots of churches, like more churches per head of population, I would say, than in Auckland. And the singing that is coming out of those churches is just beautiful. The happiness, the joy, the singing. And it makes you want to actually walk up and go in the door. And I've done that and over there. Are you finding a similar thing, in Petone, across the road from the mongrel mob, that your church is there's a whole lot of people outside that are showing the fellowship and the family, the hugs, the welcoming people before they come to church, then church, having the singing, all of that, and then there's the fellowship afterwards as well. Have you found that has given, the people in that neighborhood, and there's some pretty, sad-looking apartments and state housing and things like that, plus the gang pad. Does that lift them up and make them want to look and say, hey, what is this? This looks interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of curiosity. We have a man up operating here at the church directly to road. We've had people come from these flats, men come across, and that's without even actively reaching out. We just hear there's a lot of noise. There's curiosity when they see the place pumping with life, and the kids are running around outside and they're happy, and even the neighbours who have certain neighbours who have barricaded themselves away. But I feel like there's a bit of ease. I feel like they feel like these streets are safer, because rather than the reputation of that's the Bronx, we're saying the Bronx is the most thriving, active, safest place to be. We're here every night, most nights of the week. No one touches anything around here. We're out on the streets, are spilling over, and there's a good interaction going. And I think really it is about modelling an example of what it could be. Similar to what you just described in Fiji Islands, there's a lot of noise that comes out of this place.
Yeah.
There are a lot of men, and sometimes in churches you just see a lot of women are active, but where are the fathers? Well, here you've got some pretty burly, staunch-looking men. But when you see them engaging with their kids, I think, man, that's the answer. About streets being unsafe, and prevalent on the news are stories about people not feeling safe in their streets anymore. Well, here in the Bronx and Petone, this is probably the safest place you could be. That's what was great to host you guys the other night.
Yeah.
No fear of anything happening around here. You've got people who don't live in fear. They've been there, they've done that, and they know how to get out of it and move on and have a good life. So you can only walk the success that you've walked in, the journey, freedom and to success. So it was good to talk about it, and for you to meet a lot of those men, a lot of the brothers who did the haka the other night. Yeah, and have quite a story to tell. And
that was just an amazing experience. And I went after the event. I went out with Avi and his team, and Gull, his bodyguard. Who's Maori heritage, and Avi was a little bit shocked by that. He said, "What does this mean?" And I said to him, "Well, Avi, they've been told by the media that you're a racist, that you're divisive, that you have appalling views. And those men are pretty tough guys. And they were a little bit hesitant about, providing a little bit of muscle in case we had some Antifa people turn up, which of course they didn't. But they got to hear you speak and see what you're about and what Ezra Levant's about and what Rukshan Fernando's about, and what I'm about too, And they felt moved to show a level of respect that not everybody gets. And, Goals was saying to him, you've got to stand there, Avi, and you need to take this seriously. And then when you all lined up and had a hongi with Avi, each of you, that really, I think, brought home to him that, what the mainstream media have been saying is not true, and that people who actually bother to engage with him and understand his story and understand where he's coming from know that he isn't racist and he isn't these things, and it was incredible to watch. And I was so privileged to be able to see that at the time. But, some of those guys, full face tattoos, scary guys, but they did that humble thing. And I think that's a credit to you that they did that in that way, to show respect to you as well, that we were in your place, and the event went down really well, and it went down really well because of your involvement and the involvement of those guys.
A lot of these guys, like I said, each of these guys have a story, quite horrendous stories when you think of where these men have come from. And I'm not just one of them, I'm talking about every single man. People would be blown away when they hear the stories of these men. And yet I see these as leaders, up-and-coming leaders in this nation. These men were all connected to the Man Up program, and so they came through that movement. And they got a second chance. And we've seen just the emergence of some of the most amazing, strong leaders who are now going back out to their communities and modelling to their own family and people from where they come that it is possible to make change. We've been working with men. We worked with a lot of these guys who just come out of prison. And some of those men who were there that night, you would have pretty impressive years behind them, done time and everything. So they've been there, done that. But a lot of their rehabilitation didn't happen inside.
Probably none of it happened inside.
Didn't. And they connected with a different kind of brotherhood. It gave them purpose, got to the root cause of why they were offending and what their past was. And, I guess they realised that you don't have to be a gang member to be a broken man. I've met some of the most broken men in my 20 years working for government, some of the most dysfunctional men, and we didn't wear patches, but, we hid behind suits and ties. And yet they were probably more broken than most people. And the sad thing is, a lot of these broken men are there making decisions, trying to fix other men in the country. The men that you saw that night were an example of what we're doing with men right throughout the country. What you witnessed there on that night, I know you had an amazing night with Brian Tamaki up in Auckland. That's where this was all birthed from, and just a vision that he had to see broken men come to a point of healing so that we could heal our nation. And we know most of the issues we're facing in this nation is broken men. Policies, research, degrees can't heal that. And it's only men who can work together with men. And so it's an amazing program. It's the foundation of it. And it's what you witnessed on that night is replicated right throughout the country. It's pretty active in a number of cities throughout Australia as well.
Yeah.
So we absolutely believe that this is the way to go if we're serious about transforming our nation, that term that we love to use in government.
Yeah, transformation. So how does the pathway work? Let's say a gang member, mongrel mob gang member, looks out the window, sees that church is operating, hears some music, looks around, sees that everyone's pretty bored, there's nothing much happening. He strolls across the road in his patch, opens the door. What happens next?
Welcomed in, just like you'd be welcomed into any family. We had one last week, been coming for the last couple of weeks. Active member, connected to us, still an active member of the gangs, but it just keeps coming back because he knows and he sees modeled to him something that is better. And, you know, I just know that he keeps on getting drawn to it. We hear leaders of parties talking about, oh, this is our policy for gangs. We're going to ban patches and ban all these things. But we're saying, hey, we've had gang members right throughout the country who didn't have to have a patch ban put on them. They've all voluntarily surrendered their patches and have decided that there's something better for me. And when they have that kind of motivation, when they see an example of how every gang member wants their families to prosper, they want their kids to do well and they want something better for themselves. And so when you just model that with true authenticity, no judgment, no coercion or anything like that, we've had more of an influx of gang members come through and just see a place of acceptance. And even if you were there on Sunday, you would have seen another one come in on Sunday, all patched up, but yet felt surrounded by something that was true and authentic. And I just know it's only a matter of time. We're not telling people to change the way you look, change the way you dress. We're just saying, hey, come in amongst it.
Come as you are.
Information for yourself. And I've loved, along with the rest of our men, being able to journey with individuals who've come to us and said, listen, I want to leave. And we've encouraged them just to be bold and strong and authentic about their motivation for moving on. And most times it's been well received by the gangs.
Is there a process that they go through to come to a point where they make a decision to not only bring the message of Jesus Christ into their life, but also to abandon the gang lifestyle and drop their patch?
It's about an internal change, and the program, the Man Up program, it's a 10-week program. It's not about behavioural modification. It's about getting to the root cause of these issues and really peeling away the layers. And so when they're going through the program, they get to the root cause. We talk about each week we go through some of the key things that they'll struggle with, perversion, jealousy, probably one of the biggest demons facing men today. Heaviness, suicide. We tackle the issues that New Zealand men are renowned around the world for. Some of our domestic violence stats are the worst in the developed world. Suicide, the same. So we talk about that, but really you're unlocking and you're peeling away layers of some of the trauma that these men went through as young boys that they've grown up with that hasn't been resolved. And then they end up taking this trauma, this unresolved trauma, rejection, you name it, they take it into their relationships, they take it into their marriages. They're still hurt, but you know how the saying goes, hurt people. And so we've got grown men who have got families and wives and partners and kids who are still walking through life with the brokenness of a 5-year-old. And most of the times, it's about their relationship with their dad. That's probably the biggest problem facing this country today is fatherlessness.
And when you're in prison, you can't be a father, can you?
You can't be a father. I think the stats on a lot of our offenders shows that 65 to 70% of them grew up without a father. So I'm thinking that's the deficit in this nation. It gives rise to departments, programs, and a whole lot of taxpayer funding that goes down the drain because we're trying to deal with a problem which could have been dealt with if fathers were present.
Yeah.
That's the prevalent thing that we uncover each of these sessions. And so we work through that, uncovering, unlocking, identifying, exposing, and then understanding. And then they can go on to a point of, okay, let's start to get some healing going on now. You've managed to pinpoint the root issue. And for a lot of it's amazing. I'll sit in these sessions And, we encourage them to open up. We're in a society where it's a real tough Kiwi male, harden up, bro. Don't open up, don't be a pussy. And
don't share your feelings.
Exactly. But in this environment, it's amazing. It's such a powerful environment because men come in for the first time and they just catch this as an environment where it's safe to open up. I'm not being judged in here. What's said here stays here, doesn't leave the room. And very quickly they form a bond with men who are not just going to be there with them once a week. It's not like a once a week, 10, 12-week tick box exercise. Outside of that, it's a 24/7. And so we've got men who themselves have experienced the transformation, so grateful that they give up their time, their lives to help other brothers. And that means, which is what no service will give you, you've got the availability of these men at 3 o'clock in the morning, any time of day, stepping out of their convenience, giving of their time and their resource. A lot of providers say, how do you get these men to be this faithful? I'm thinking because they've touched and experienced something that's very, very real for them. And so why wouldn't you want to do that for someone else?
What happens if they decide they want to drop their patch, that they want to start a new life outside of the gangs? Do they just take their patch off and that's it? Or is there some sort of ceremony? And how do the gangs react to that when somebody drops their patch?
Well, my experience of the men in my group who have wanted to leave the gangs, they've come and talked to me about it and said, this is what we want to do. The ones who have decided to leave have been pretty high up in the gangs. And so they've had some good influence and good respect. And I think there's some real power. I really believe that when they go back to the gangs, but the gangs can see the transformation that these men have made. They're not just doing a runner, but they're witnessing that there's something real. And a lot of the gangs, and some of them have said, look, I miss my family. I want to go back to my family. They've had no trouble with the men that I've dealt with who've left, have had no problems. I've heard other stories from some of my colleagues about the men who've wanted to leave, and when they've gone back to the gangs and said, I want to leave, and they know the kaupapa of man up that they've connected to, there's been that degree of respect from their leaders that they've said, okay, we'll let you leave, but if you leave that, we're coming after you.
Right.
So they have respect for what these men are leaving to go to. And in a way, they're saying that's the only condition on which we're accepting that you're leaving, because we can see what you're going towards. But you leave that, then, we're after you. So it varies from person to person, but and if they've needed the support, then we've had brothers who've supported them going and making that approach to their respective leaders. So it's great. One of the greatest things is at our national conventions when you see brothers, and I've got them here, who they knew each other in prison. They were enemies in prison. Mangrumon, Black Power, They knew each other in the yard. They'd suss each other out. And now they're brothers in arms, brothers who support each other, who back each other. They don't have to watch their backs. They've got each other's backs. There's nothing more rewarding and more satisfying than to see men who were previously the menace to society becoming some of the greatest leaders, greatest mentors, men who I'm proud for my kids to call uncle. And not only that, but they're men who are prospering. They're getting into business. They're prospering financially. We've had so many men make commitments to their women. We've had so many man-up weddings. There's a saying that we say, if you love her, marry her. And so a lot of these men throughout the country, they're saying we're the first ones in our family to ever have a wedding.
Wow.
About generations. So it's great. This is transformation from the ground up.
Yeah.
There's not a cent of government funding that goes into this. No expert researchers have come to develop this program. It's a heart thing. It's come from people who really walked this pathway and have got years of investment to show in it. And I'm absolutely convinced that this is the way to go with men in New Zealand.
You've been a leader inside government. you've been working in government ministries. You went to law school, you're highly educated. You left all of that behind to, take up, to become a pastor, to follow that lead. And now you're also looking at moving into politics. You could have sat there in the government ministries getting paid huge dollars, developing, bumper sticker type policies that ultimately go nowhere other than to suck more money out of the government. Is that what's driving you, that you feel a need that perhaps within government it's not the way to work? And so you've for a start went to Destiny, and now you're looking at politics as a way to continue that work rather than sit inside the system?
Absolutely. I sat in government probably too long. I had a 20-year career in government. Strategies, and most of them were in the justice sector: crime prevention, youth offending, violence prevention, you name it. I was in there. I was at the Beehive when we would launch all these strategies.
Yeah.
The amount of taxpayer dollars that went into the process of strategy development before any cent had hit the ground. And really, there's just been different iterations of these strategies over the years with successive governments. They've changed things. So if I look at a strategy today, it looks exactly identical to what I would have worked on 25 years ago. And people think we did great things. And yeah, there was a lot that was done. But at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding. And the statistics are still the same. They're getting worse. Crime is happening earlier, and it's a lot more violent. It's concerning. And girls, violent young girls. So that tells me bureaucracy is not the way to deal with things. Successive governments, layers of bureaucracy. The only transformation I see is a bloated bureaucracy. And now all of a sudden people want to talk about culling it. Well, it's a little bit too little too late, because they wouldn't want to know what to do with the money if they did that anyway. But I'm comparing 20 years in government with the few years that I've spent outside of government. I've seen more transformation in this ground-up approach that has had not one policy analyst develop a program, not one researcher or evaluator develop it, and not one cent of government funding. And I'm seeing more lasting results that I challenge any politician to equal it. And that's probably what motivates me. I'm sitting up thinking, man, where's this money going in government? How much longer are we going to keep on making the same mistakes? I've worked under Labour, National, Labour, National, Labour, National. Probably about 5 prime ministers I've worked under.
Yeah.
And yet the statistics are still the same. And so I'm thinking, wake up. When are we going to learn? 5 years ago, we stood on the steps of Parliament. 5 years ago, we packed the lawns of Parliament with ex-gang members, ex-drug dealers, ex-violent wife beaters. They were all filling the steps of Parliament, and we had all the leaders. We had David Seymour there. We had Judith Collins on the steps of Parliament, and we had Andrew Little, who was a then Minister of Justice, and they all publicly endorsed the Man Up program. This works. How can you deny it when you've got a lawn full of people who are clearly, obviously, people who have been through a pretty tough life? They all endorsed it. And then we had Calvin Davis, who's the, current then and current Minister of Corrections.
Yeah.
Totally decided that he'd rather announce $98 million for what he had installed to reform prisoners. Well, I go into the prisons all the time, and I've been going in since I've been doing the Man Up program. I used to do it up in Auckland at Puremoremo, down here at Rimutaka. And all I have these guys asking me, and our other guys who go on, is, what you're doing with me, can we do it? Can I have this happening in the prisons? Why would you block something that's working? And it's working on the smell of an oily rag.
It's astonishing. It really is astonishing, because I've seen those results. Okay, sure, it was a couple of hours, but those guys that were out the front, that were helping at the back with the sound system and that, they've all got similar backgrounds, and they were the nicest, most approachable people that I've seen in a long time. Their tattoos mean nothing to me, and they actually are standing proud now rather than broken, And it was incredible to see that. And that's why I wanted to talk with you. That's why I've wanted to talk with Brian Tamaki, because I want to learn more about this Man Up program, because, the church that I'm involved in Auckland has a similar, outreach towards gang members with the Grace Foundation, and they're making a difference too. And again, they're shunned by those in power, although they're a bit more loved by the media, because they've got Dave Latelli there, just, out there as an evangelist for their program. But they're blocked as well, because people see, hundreds of gang members, and literally it is hundreds of people wearing colours, and they're big people, and they're all there on a Saturday at the church, and it intimidates people. Whereas I look at it and I think, wow, they must be doing something right if there's like 200 people here. Like, who gets up early on a Saturday morning to go to church? There's 200 gang members here that are going to church.
And how safe do you feel?
I feel perfectly safe. I'm literally not afraid of anybody. So,
Yeah. We, throughout the protest season, we lead these big protest marches, and I would have the police thanking us for helping to make their job easier.
Yeah.
The greatest thing for me is that we had a whole lot of women on these protests who would come up to us and they'd say, we feel so safe with all of these men around us. These big, burly men, ex-crims and everything, and yet they are men who found a purpose. They love their country, and now they're standing up and staunch for something else. And so when you ask me about, leaving government and coming out here and being in the church, and then suddenly taking this direction of getting involved in politics, it's because I see that the problem isn't in shortage of programs or solutions. The problem is the politicians. At the end of the day, the problem is red, blue successive governments are not listening to the people. We've been a part of that. That's why it was a pleasure to help you guys on Saturday night, because we understand cancel culture. We understand when politicians stop listening that you need to do things differently just to catch their attention. You'll see one of our candidates in Auckland, popped his head over the fence halfway through the beginning of Chris Luxon's press conference, but we got to get your attention. Look at what's happening. Do you really care about this country? And so that's why it's about you've got to put something a stake in the ground. Kiwis want to be safe. Successive governments have got it wrong, and so we're saying, how do you put what you've done that works into a strategy? We're talking law and order. We've developed under Freedoms New Zealand an amazing law and order strategy. And under the strategy, we've targeted these key areas. We talk about homicides, domestic violence, ram raids, and gangs. And we're going to flip the script on this. And we can make bold statements. Politicians do it all the time, particularly around election time. But we're doing them not based on wishful thinking or things that we think we can do. But we're saying we're doing them because we're making these statements because we're already seeing the results right now, doing them. And so we've set some bold targets for the first 180 days. And we say, hey, we can reduce ram raids, homicides, domestic violence, gang numbers to what they were pre-Labor government.
Yeah.
So, if you really want to take a chance on something that's going to bring some transformation, not only will you feel safer in your streets, but imagine the change in the nation when a man who was good for nothing, didn't back himself, and only just inflicted...
Took from society instead of gave to society.
And now we've turned them into men who are going to add to the economy, who are going to raise good kids. They're going to break generational dysfunction better than any politician, than any policy analyst or research you could do. There's something true and authentic about that. And we want to raise that caliber of men in this nation again. And we already see them there. This is happening, on a volunteer basis. Imagine if government decided to invest taxpayer money in something that is authentic, that works. You had a couple of hours with us on Saturday, sorry, but it left an impact.
Oh, it did.
And
it really did. And, it left an impact on Ezra Levant. He spent a considerable amount of time before the show got going talking to you about this, and it really impressed him. I was privileged to be, staying with those guys, at the accommodation that we had, and I got to hear what they were talking about, and they were seriously impressed about that, and it really made an impact on them to understand how you're breaking the cycle of violence. But, you've been talking about how the politicians haven't been listening. You've been talking about how the bureaucrats haven't been listening. Aren't you running a risk by standing for Parliament that you could, in fact, become a politician? And how are you going to guard against being one of those unlistening politicians that we've had? We've had thousands of people stand for Parliament. They say they're going to do all of these things, and when they get in there and they get hold of the metaphorical levers of power, literally do nothing. What are you going to do to guard against that should you become an MP and a politician? Well,
straight up front, we've held ourselves accountable beforehand. We're saying, you hold us accountable. You hold us accountable. This is what we say we can do. And we can't do a worse job than what's been done over successive governments over many, many years. We can't do any worse than the 88-year blue and red coalition of Labour and National. And I know that Kiwis are serious. We're not just talking about law and order and crime. We're talking about economic prosperity. Because when you fix the man, you're fixing the families. You're getting rid of broken families. You're getting rid of homelessness. You're getting rid of, mental health, all these areas. You're dealing to so many sectors of society that are draining our economy. And so for us, it's about, we're saying, hey, keep us accountable. How many politicians have been accountable? There should be a job description and a performance appraisal that you're out if you haven't delivered. How many promises and things have not been delivered by this government and by the previous one? And so I guess, I've spent too long knowing what the sound of broken promises leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. And, I don't want to be a part of something like that. And I think it's something that is so authentic about what I'm saying. You can't unsee or unexperience what your transformation that I've seen in the last few years. There's something real. We need a new type of politician. And you'll see the type of men and women who are standing are not seasoned politicians.
No.
I'm a seasoned bureaucrat. So I've got to get some soap to wash that off me, because it's like I'm so used to conforming to a bureaucratic way of thinking and conforming.
Yeah.
Really what we need is disruption to that monotonous, compliant process that has kept us doing the same thing and getting the same results, and the whole country is becoming anesthetized to that. We need to break something open. It takes something pretty radical to shock and to jolt people out of what's the same old. Let's really make a change. I had a lady come into the launch of my campaign the other week, and she said, I'm a hardcore Labour supporter. And so I'm coming here because I just want people to vote Labour, because the last thing I want is a national government. I said, well, that's you and all your lot, but there's another lot who absolutely don't want another Labour government, Why does it have to be this or that? How about we've got a bunch of New Zealanders who are not held to ransom by red or blue, but actually can rise up and take control of our country back and not have to be constantly disappointed about what a blue or red government does. But we know what works. And, I swayed that lady by the end of the session. she's going to go right and get a whole lot of people to jump on board what we're doing. She heard something authentic.
Yeah.
And I thought, hey, I've been there 20 years. I know what I'm talking about. I know
that's the key thing in politics, and it's what I say to politicians when I'm training them or when I'm discussing things with them. And this is the thing that I think is Christopher Luxon's problem, is that he's got some wonderful things that he's saying, but it doesn't sound authentic. It sounds like it's rehearsed. He thinks that he's got solutions, but he actually hasn't seen the effects of what politicians can do to people. And, I said this many, many years ago when Helen Clark's government came to an end. I said, to a Labour guy who said, we've just got to stop the Nats getting in. And I said, well, you're not going to do that in 2008. And he said, why is that? I said, because the people have had 9 years of Helen Clark as a Prime Minister, and they still live in the same crappy neighbourhoods. Their kids still go to the same crappy schools. They are still living in the same crappy house. Nothing has changed for them, and they voted 3 times in a row for that leadership. And Helen Clark was a competent Prime Minister. I didn't agree with her politics, but she knew what she was doing. And now you look, we've had 9 years of National following Helen Clark, and then we've had 6 years of Labour following John Key. Those people are still living in those areas. Still, nothing's changed. And if we, the very definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and over again and expecting different results.
So how do you jog people out of that?
Well, it isn't boot camps, that's for sure. That's an easy thing to say. We're going to go and be tough on the. What you're going to be? Are you tougher than the tough guys? Like, seriously? Are we going to have politicians that are going to be tougher than the tough guys? It's like they've never met anybody from the streets.
They're out of touch. They're definitely out of touch. I ran Chris Luxton's law and order policy by some of my guys who have done a lot of time, who have been in gangs and they just pulled it apart in minutes as to why it wouldn't work. And I'm thinking, were you consulted on something like this? Because I'm sure that these guys weren't part of the consultation process to inform what's going to make a good policy. Our policy is based on people who have walked the walk and they can talk the talk because they've been there, done that, but more importantly, they've got the results to show for it. And so I think that is a problem that you've identified. If you've got politicians who have experienced that, out of touch with the community, and as you would have seen of our guy stepping over the fence to talk to Chris, he says, Chris, I've never seen you. You're standing there and you talk a good talk, but we've never seen you down in the community where it's all happening.
Yeah.
If you decided to come, you'd actually catch a true and accurate feel of what's going on, but you're absent. And so the better of the two Chris's, and then Chris decides to take him. He says, well, let's go and have a private conversation somewhere else. But the idea of that is, no, let's be transparent and actually be willing to stand up and face the people and respond to what the people want to know.
But that's the problem, isn't it? Christopher Luxon has shown that he doesn't want to listen to the people. You were one of the leaders at Parliament, at the protest. David Seymour claims that he met the leaders of the thing. You were one of the leaders. Can you scotch his claims right here and right now for listeners of Reality Check Radio? Did David Seymour meet you during that protest?
Not meet me. He probably hovered around and met somebody. He just has to talk to somebody who's part of the protest and claim that he spoke to the protest leaders, but he didn't turn up. And that's why I'm saying to people, listen, no party who is currently in government, whether it's Labour, whether it's National, whether it's Greens, whether it's Te Pāti Māori or ACT, they're all the same. I remember the high point of that protest when polls show that at least 30% of New Zealanders agreed with what we were protesting about. So that's a huge portion of the country. Surely that would warrant maybe 30% of MPs would represent that 30%.
Coming out and talking.
Not one MP represents that 30%. Now, there we go. So that tells me they want to put themselves, it is a grand coalition of people who won't listen to the community. And this is what we're breaking. Someone challenged me and said, who do you think you are running in the Prime Minister's electorate? You're running against the Prime Minister. He won by a 20,000 lead. And I said, well, he happens to live in my electorate, but that's not the point. The point is I know that there are many people who are disgruntled with this government, and I'm chasing as many party votes for Freedom of New Zealand as I can. Who are saying we're no longer supportive of this government. Now, big one, don't make the mistake of withdrawing your support for them and throwing it to another party that's currently in there and would be guilty of doing the same thing again.
Yeah.
Let's go from one abusive partner to the other one. It's another revolving door. One parts of the country stand up and stand together and actually make a difference. We know we've got the goods. We're good for it. We are absolutely good for it because we walk and talk, and we are the solution because we ourselves have been a walking solution.
Yeah.
And to find any educated people to do that, it's right in front of me. You witnessed it on Saturday night. And so it's like, man, how do you milk that? How do you squeeze the gold out of that?
Well, I guess you've just got to do it more and more and more and expose more and more people to that message. And I guess that's the importance of the political process, that we don't shut down debates. We don't shut down ideas that may challenge us. We listen, and we may actually learn something by listening to people who we thought or maybe have been described as having opposing views. And that's the thing that impressed me the most, is that Brian and yourself, knew who Avi Yemeni was, what people have said about him, and you provided the venues anyway. It doesn't mean you support what his ideas are. All you're supporting is his ability to speak freely.
That's right.
Well, Heker, I wish you all the best for the election. I hope that you can make a difference. You've certainly got your heart in the right place. And I just wanted to explore some of that journey so that people can understand what motivates you to stand for Parliament. And, it's only a few short weeks away. And I hope and pray that people like yourself, good people like yourself, will be chosen by the electors to represent them in Parliament, that we will get politicians that will start listening, and that we will break that cycle of lurching from left to right, from red to blue. And so I appreciate your time for coming on The Crunch.
Thanks, Kel.
And we'll have a chat, I'm sure, in the coming years about some other things.
Well, we'll see you at Parliament on the 28th.
Yeah.
28th.
It's in my planning.
It's like, let's get all these Kiwis together and say, hey, you love your country. You don't want them to sell your country off. Well, then let's all be united, turn up there on the 28th and make some noise. But no, it's been an honour and a privilege, Cameron. Great to connect with you. And I know that there's going to be many, many more great things that we're all going to be doing together.
Let's just commit to stay in touch, because talking is the pathway to freedom. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you. We'll see you soon.
HEKER is one of life's genuine, quiet heroes, seeing a need and making a huge difference. His story and the pathways to redemption he facilitates are truly inspiring. I hope he does make it into Parliament, because I think he could make a real difference. Don't forget to send comments on HEKER's interview to inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.